everybody, it's Dan. Welcome back and welcome to another shopping guide video. This is the fifth one and we're going to be looking at dwarves. And if you're not familiar with this series I'm doing, it is for looking at non-Games Workshop multi-part plastic figures for use in Warhammer armies. This is something that I've mentioned in all these videos that I've been doing for like 20 years. I've been playing Warhammer but not using Games Workshop figures, so I have a pretty good grasp on the options that are out there. We've looked at Empire, Bretonnia, Undead, Orcs and Goblins, and now Dwarves. And I've mapped out all the remaining kits that I want to talk about. So we're going to have a separate video on Chaos next, and then I'll do one final video on kind of all other fantasy factions. So I've mentioned in those other videos too, again, this is purely multi-part plastic sets that we're looking at in 28 mil. So roughly 148 to 156 scale, somewhere in between there is what we're going to be talking about. So a number of kits that I want to talk about here today from 4 manufacturers. Really, there's a fifth one that I'll throw in at the end, but there's 4 main manufacturers to talk about. So let's dive on in here. We're going to start out with Oathmark, and Oathmark I've covered pretty extensively on this channel. We've got reviews for lots of their kits, and I mention constantly that I love the aesthetic. It's really like grounded fantasy. Feels kind of like Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, where it feels like it really could have happened at some point in history. And their dwarf range is no exception. So they're really, I think, beautifully sculpted and designed. All the Oathmark ranges, or I should say all of the different factions within Oathmark, try to strive for like a light, medium, heavy version of a concept. And the dwarves, I think, best exemplify this, where they have their dwarf infantry, which is the medium infantry, which come with hand weapon shield option, bow option, or a spear option. There are the light dwarves, which are, as you might have guessed, more lightly armored, and they have a bow option. They have like some hood, like cape options, and they have pickaxes, so you can make some miners as well, which is a cool addition. And then they have heavy dwarves, which, as the name also implies, have like plate armor, a lot of like heavy masks, and some two-handed weapons in there too. So the other main benefit to Oathmark in general, but the dwarf range here, is that if you built an army out of these 3 kits, all of the bits mix and match perfectly. Everything is scaled together deliberately so that you can do that. And the price is super, super cheap. We're talking about, again, for 30 miniatures, usually like $30 USD, so $1 a miniature. And again, you can, from just those 3 kits, make pretty much every model you would need in a dwarf army other than like Seekers or Slayers, right? So anyway, definitely check this range out if that kind of 70s, 80s fantasy art vibe is something that you're into. Now let's move into Fireforge Games. So Fireforge has a comparatively small range of fantasy figures. They mostly delve into historical subjects, but their dwarf range, I think they did via Kickstarter, as they do a lot of their newer ranges these days. And it's actually one of the more extensive. They have 5 different kits within their dwarf range, compared to, for example, their Undead, which I think only have 3. But the 5 kits are warriors, which come with hand weapon, shield, and spear variants, nicely plate armor. I think it's really beautifully sculpted. They even have like some female heads included. I think maybe my only criticism of the entirety of the range is that the beards are kind of short, well kempt, and pay attention to like the armor design. It's very like 15th, 16th century European armor. Even the weapons that they're wielding, I don't think there's any axes outside of the hammer or box. I think it is like a Falchion style, like arming sword, which is cool. It's a really neat take on dwarves, but it won't be for everybody. So you definitely want to check out the whole range, all of the different miniatures, if this is something you're thinking of getting into. They have a box of hammerers, and the thing to pay attention to here is that the bodies are actually the same as the warriors box. It just has a different weapon frame, and that actually is mirrored within the ranged weapon units, in that they also have like a crossbowman and an arquebus box, and there's like a heavy plate armor which is shared by the warriors and the hammerers, and then they each have their own weapon spurs, and then there's like a medium armored dwarf frame which is shared by both of the ranged weapons, and then there's a separate frame for the crossbows and for the handguns. So they probably could have streamlined things by just including like both the handgun and the crossbow frames within one box, maybe charging slightly more. Same thing with like the hammers and the sword and the spears. I understand why they did it this way, but that's just something to be aware of. Really, between those 4 sets, you're talking about 2 core body frames and then some different weapon options. But also interestingly, they have a box of Ram Riders. I think they're called Ram Bucks, is what they have kind of come up with. And I think these look fantastic. They, again, going back to like 15th, 16th century kind of European aesthetics, especially the mounted guys, look like German riders. Like some of them even have like pistol options. Again, it's a cool take on dwarves instead of just being kind of the kind of tropey Viking Northman kind of design for dwarves. I like this a lot. As I said, though, it's not for everybody, and it's probably something you want to kind of like frame an army around. So check them out. Again, those are the 5 kits from Fireforge, and they're going to scale really, really well with Games Workshop stuff. Just so we're clear, the Oathmark stuff is going to be a little bit small. The Oathmark, I think, would be really suited to like Lord of the Rings strategy battle games, Middle Earth strategy battle game proxies, because they're almost identical in scale, maybe even a little bit bigger, but not quite as big as like Warhammer stuff. Whereas this Fireforge stuff is pretty big. Like it's gonna scale up very nicely with your Warhammer Dwarf models. So check that range out too. Mantic was the first non-Games Workshop company that I'm aware of to make multi-part plastic dwarves. Really, multi-part plastic. A lot of these fantasy armies that we're talking about, but multi-part plastic dwarves. And they have 4 plastic kits within their range. You have to really pay attention to the Mantic range if you're looking for like purely plastic sets, because they've got tons and tons of sets that have like metal or resin components, or which are like including that core plastic frame, but are really just like they have a unit of Rangers that I didn't include here that is just a mashup of 2 of the sets that we're going to talk about here. So anyway, pay really close attention if you're shopping Mantic to what sprues are included and what materials are used, because they really do delve into a lot of different materials, like resin, like PVC plastic, this like regular kind of like hip style plastic. So anyway, pay attention to that. But they've got 4 plastic kits within their dwarf range. They've got their core warriors, and I'll say here that I'm not a big fan of Mantic's aesthetic with dwarves. They remind me a little bit of World of Warcraft. I think that's no shade on anybody that does like this or likes World of Warcraft. It's just not for me. Again, if it's like a spectrum when it comes to fantasy design with Oathmark at one end and Mantic at the other, I'm decidedly in the Oathmark camp, I think. But again, I'm glad that we have options for everybody. But you'll notice that kind of design is carried throughout the entirety of the dwarf range. Kind of the flat top helmet, short, kind of more angular looking beard designs, things of that nature. So they have the core warriors frame, and this is a good number. I think it's like at least a decade old. I was going to say number of years old, but it's about a decade old. But in terms of like crispness of details, I think this works just fine. It's certainly not like the worst designed Mantic sets out there, despite its age and despite, again, the fact that I'm personally biased against this particular kind of design style. They have a unit of stone breakers too, I think is what they call them. It's like hammerers, 2-handed weapon guys, which I've not dealt with personally, but from looking online, I think the way this set is designed is it's the main warrior's frame again, but they have a separate like mini frame with 2 figures, like a supplemental frame, which include like 2 more guys with 2-handed weapons. So correct me if I'm wrong, if you know in the comments if you've dealt with this set, if that's not true, but that's my interpretation, is that it's basically the core warrior frame again, or core warrior box again, with some extra 2-handed weapon guys and a separate plastic sprue. They have their Dwarf Iron Watch, which if you've watched my like most and least favorite sets from each manufacturer videos, you'll know this was my pick for my least favorite set from Mantic. Both because the design, again, as I just mentioned, is not really for me, but also because this entire set is comprised of a sprue of 2 models, repeated I think 10 times, and it's not super versatile. I think it's like 2 head options for 2 bodies, maybe a 3rd head, I can't remember, but that's my main gripe with it, is that it really could have been like, it could have been fully assembled models that were sold at that point, like Reaper does, for example. But it is technically a multi-part plastic set within this range, and if you're already going the Mantic route, is definitely something that you want to incorporate just to keep the design consistent there. And they also have a box that has it's just like a cannon. I think there's variant like barrel types that can go into it. can't remember if they call it a lead belcher or if I'm just mixing that up with my Citadel paint color, but this one works just fine. Again, if you're into this like Mantic design, you're gonna like this too because it's the same like dwarf design for the crew as well, and it is a multi-part plastic set. I mentioned there was that fifth set of Rangers that I didn't include here, but it is worth mentioning, I guess, where again it is a mixture of, I think it's the Iron Watch and the Warriors sprues just kind of mashed up into a single box to make some ranged and some close combat guys. So that was clever marketing on their part. And that's all the multi-part true plastic sets in the Dwarf Mantic range. There's lots of other stuff that's metal, that's resin, that is like PVC plastic to look out for. So check that range out if that interests you. And they also have a smaller range of Abyssal Dwarves, Chaos Dwarves, Infernal Dwarves if you're a 9th Age player. And I only just recently discovered these, and I think these look fantastic. In stark contrast, I think, to their like base dwarf range. I think these are really well detailed. I'd like to get a box of these in person just to see how they hold up. But part of it too is not super fair because Chaos Dwarves, kind of by nature, their design is always meant to be kind of cartoony and silly. So I don't, I guess, have the same criticisms. Again, it's unfair. I don't have the same criticisms of the cartoony design for their Abyssal Dwarves as I do, say, for their regular dwarves. But I think, yeah, these look very, very detailed. There's 2 core plastic boxes in the range, if I'm correct. And it's their Warriors, and then it is also their, I think, called Immortals. So, yeah, they look really, really good. And that also might be a situation where there's like a core body frame and then you have different weapon options for the 2 sets. But I'm not super familiar with it. I just know that they exist. So also some great resin and metal options within that range too. So again, if you're into all of this, Mantic, the price actually has been creeping up over the years. It used to be that they were like the cheapest option on the market, but that's certainly not the case anymore compared to some of the competitors out there for historical figures, like Victrix, Perry Brothers, etc. But still cheaper than Games Workshop. And again, if you like these designs, definitely something worth checking out. I'll have links to all of these manufacturers if I didn't mention it down in the description if you'd like to check out more information on these ranges. And then finally, I wanted to talk about Avatars of War, which have a range of dwarves. I'm going to also say carefully here that there's one true multi-part plastic set, which is their Berserkers, which is really, really excellent. I've dealt with this one personally. And the owner of Avatars of War, or at least the founder of Avatars of War, is Felix. I can't remember his last name, but he's an excellent sculptor. He used to work for Games Workshop. His his design, his aesthetic is very like 90s, early 2000s Games Workshop in terms of like fantasy design style, and I like that a lot. His weapon designs are always, I think, deliberately like comically oversized. So even like with my Berserkers, even by Games Workshop standards, that's what I'm saying. They're huge. So I swapped my like axes out on my Berserkers for some regular Citadel ones. But I think his design's fantastic, and I believe he used to sculpt for Citadel. So I think that's part of where all of this comes from. There are actually 5 kits within their dwarf range, but I'll include pictures of them here just for the sake of completedness. But I'm not really going to go into them because they're not true plastic. They're that PVC plastic that feel more like resin. It's really difficult to deal with if you've never dealt with it. I think they look fantastic, especially their hammers. I think the design really harkens again back to like 6th, 7th edition Warhammer, and I love that. But they come, like if you order the boxes, they're going to come in little like baggies with already cut off pieces for all the miniatures. So it's not like they're going to come on sprues, where the Berserkers, by contrast, are true plastic. They come on sprues, so they're pretty cool. So definitely worth checking these guys out. But again, just a word of warning that the other 4 plastic kits, even on the website, they list them as plastic, but it's that PVC plastic. It's not the like plastic on sprues that you would be accustomed to from Games Workshop. And I mentioned there's a 5th company I wanted to talk about here because this is kind of a wild card, but it's something I've done personally. I've mentioned some conversion stuff in some prior videos that you might not have thought of, but that's Gripping Beasts Viking Herdman. And I say this again because I've done this conversion and it works really, really well. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this with like Warlords Viking models or with even Victrix Viking models as much as I love them. The reason that the Gripping Beast ones work so well is because the figures are already kind of stocky and squat. And that makes them, I mentioned in the prior video, it makes them very good for just wargaming in general because they're so sturdy. But what it also makes them good for is with a very simple cut at the leg joint, by which I mean like where the legs connect up with the chainmail hauberks, which are all the same length, or roughly the same length. If you make that cut there and then cut just a couple of millimeters off of the length of the legs and reattach them, they look like dwarves. They really, really do, and it's a very convincing conversion. So if it's something I have some of that mixed in with my Oathmark dwarves, it works really, really well, and it's something that I can personally recommend because I've done it. And that kit, I think, is still probably one of the best Gripping Beast kits there is, even though it's now a 12-year-old set, something like that. But it's really, really cool, even just to pick up to use as Vikings. But if you're looking for some more dwarves, especially as I said, if you're going the Oathmark route, that conversion works very well, and it'll scale up very nicely with your Oathmark stuff. And there you have it, a comparatively short one, just because there's not that many options in the market compared to, say, the Empire, which I think is the longest video that we had. But I do have content left. I want to do a Chaos one, which is going to be another long one. And then I'm going to do one for kind of all of the other fantasy factions that don't necessarily have enough stuff to warrant a video of their own. So stay tuned for all of that. I appreciate you dropping by for this one in the meantime, everybody. And until next time, happy gaming.